Project Sweetie Pie was started in 2010. There were those that were trying to close the school. I approached them and asked them if I could get the youth in North Minneapolis to start growing vegetables, and we've been there ever since. I'd want us to really demonstrate the sustainable development goals. If we're all well-intentioned, then let's be more intentional. I'm glad that the USDA is providing these resources because they're sorely needed. One of the things that I'm most proud of with Project Sweetie Pie is we created one of the first urban farm legislation in the nation.
The Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, selected Project Sweetie Pie as one of the first 17 People's Gardens for America. Project Sweetie Pie is a model of positive urban agriculture. It's community-based, it goes across generations. It's located in North Minneapolis, which is a food desert. This garden supports the local community, not just with food, but also as a place to come together. NRCS is supporting Project Sweetie Pie and other people's gardens with small grants that they can use to expand their gardens, bring in native plants, support sustainability, and involve the community. The Natural Resources Conservation Service is partnering with Project Sweetie Pie and Xerces and other community organizations like Pillsbury to bring all of the resources needed to support community gardens.
We're at Oak Park. This is a farm that is run by Pillsbury United. It's been really fun partnering with Project Sweetie Pie and with the associated partners as well, Pillsbury United and Growing North. I've been out here a few times now, getting to know all the different players and some of the youth. Many hands make light work, and I really love the momentum that Michael has brought to this project. The attention, just the engagement around it has been really inspiring.
Today we have a number of groups. We have Grow North Minneapolis, we have Project Sweetie Pie, NET, which is the Northside Safety Net, and we have the University of Minnesota Hennepin County.
There's a multitude of groups, about 60 to 70 young people, most of them doing Step Up, which is a program through the city of Minneapolis for youth to get early experience in work environments, learning professionalism, how to be at a work environment, time management, just basic little things that help to prepare them for the workforce. And so we have a farm back here where we teach kids how to grow.
So today we're working at the People's Garden. We got a couple groups out here from the community. We're just gardening out here, kind of like rehabilitating this space. We got a really strong group of kids. I've been gardening for about 2 years now. I have a background in arts and nonprofit work, but I wanted to re-immerse myself into the community, into land, so I started working with Growing North last year at their seed giveaway and then the farmers markets, and then I just came over here and I started helping lead the youth.
One of the first questions I always ask young people is, what would you do if Cub Foods went out of business? There's many students that really don't know where a pickle comes from. They don't understand that a cucumber is a pickled. We've been so severed from Mother Earth, so severed from our agricultural heritage that folks just don't know.
The youth are our future. It's good to have youth here to be able to model the behavior we want to see, but as well have them to learn from us, and we learn from them because everybody's a teacher, everybody's a student. So our goal is to create a healing space for our communities, but as well, what we do is we initiate leadership so everyone gets a turn to facilitate workshops, to be the leader for the day so that we can install that leadership ability in them.
They are our future, our youth, and we want to see them improve what they can do in their learning skills and help out with the communities that are out here, because we need a lot of help in our community, especially over North Minneapolis.
There's the myth that we have a strong food system, and it was even made more aware through the pandemic that we're not only just talking about food security, we're talking about national food security. And so it's incumbent that we train the next generation of urban farmers. If we're going to maintain Minnesota's strong heritage of agriculture, then we have to be about the business and make sure that we're growing the next generation of environmentalists, the next generation of urban farmers, etc.
Urban agriculture is becoming more and more important in America. In places like North Minneapolis, we have food deserts where healthy local food is otherwise not available. Gardens like this one here, maintained by Project Sweetie Pie, bring together the community and supply local, healthy, sustainable food. This garden provides food to youth and elderly and even donates the extra produce to the community soup kitchen.
This is Oak Park Community Center. This is a place where we serve community meals. I think it's very important for people to learn, especially young people, to have a better relationship with their food. Most kids, the only relationship they have with their food is to go to the grocery store and pick it up. They don't understand that some of their food comes from another country entirely. I don't tell them not to eat anything. I just want them to know where it comes from and how hard other people and systems have been put in place so that they can eat what they want when they want, and that is not going to always be an option, so it's good to know and appreciate where your food comes from. Some of the food that we grow goes back to the community. Some of the food that we grow, we cook ourselves, and that's my favorite thing to do with the youth, is just to pick the food that we grow and eat it, because I think it's the best lesson for them, is to watch something grow, put it in the pan, eat it, and it completes the full cycle. And so that's really important to me. What we don't eat, we give to the community.
We have young people who are planning the garden, designing the garden, planting the garden, maintaining the garden, harvesting the garden, cooking the food, serving the food, and eating the food, and then compost the food waste from the gardens. Because here at Oak Park, not only do they have Pillsbury United Farms, but they also have a community dinner program where anybody in the community can come on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays for a great home-cooked community meal.
We've been working with Project Sweetie Pie and a number of other Northside organizations promoting environmental education, food waste reduction. We also have grant programs to encourage planting of trees to restore the canopy, and all of which have a role in fighting climate change.
This is an area of Hennepin County that does experience a lot of racial disparities, and we're here to support the work that's happening in the community around environmental issues, food, and environmental justice.
Areas like North Minneapolis are currently considered what's called a food desert, and so we want to teach people to take advantage of the land that's around them, to farm and use that land to produce their own fresh food and develop some food security that's under their control. So I think it's really important for people who may not have grown up knowing how to garden to get exposure to gardening and see it's a lot easier than what you might think it is.
We are growing a multitude of foods. I really wanted to focus on teaching kids about North American agriculture in general. So we're working to grow foods that grow well here. We're growing corn, we're growing a multitude of squashes, melons, kale, cabbage. We're growing an herb garden as well, sage, mint, and then we got the music going. And today in particular, we are growing a couple of rows of pollinators to attract bees, butterflies, and other pollinating insects to our garden.
Nationwide, NRCS is in an agreement with the Xerces Society to support urban agriculture and pollinators in urban locations. In this location, we were very lucky that Xerces had funding available to provide pollinator plants specifically to the north side of Minneapolis.
NRCS has really helped me have conversations with folks about pollinators who maybe wouldn't have been thinking about pollinator or wildlife habitat. This is a kind of a new territory for us to work hand in hand with urban farmers, putting in conservation plantings, bringing pollinator habitat to the urban farms. We're doing it as a community. Everybody's getting their hands dirty, and we're planting a variety of native flowers, native grasses, all things that will benefit pollinators and beneficial insects in this garden. So we selected maybe about 40 different species of native plants, species that will flower from spring to fall so that we have abundant floral resources for pollinators throughout the growing season. There's probably 30 or more species of flowers and native grasses and sedges. We want flowers for the nectar and the pollen, but we also want grassy sedges because they create nesting habitat. overwintering habitat for beneficial insects and pollinators so that they can stay, they can have a permanent home in the garden for years to come, and they can constantly be available as a resource for pest management, for pollinating the squash and the tomatoes and the peppers, so that they're just an integral community member in this community garden.
So here we have a handful of Minnesota indigenous native grass seeds, 5 different species that have been mixed together and are used for part of the planting here today. There's straw mulch that has seed underneath it, and it's between the rows of the native wildflower and grass plugs that are being planted as part of the collaborative.
We prepared the garden by weeding it. We laid out all the plants so that each one is about 12 inches apart. And then all the youth and all the community members got their shovels ready and dug holes, tucked in those little plants, those little plugs, watered them, in some cases added a little compost, and then we added a few inches of natural wood mulch on top just to give some initial weed suppression for those plants and to keep the moisture in and to allow those plants to do their work while the rest of the youth and the gardeners are working on the vegetable beds throughout the rest of the growing season. So here's the people's garden. We've got strips of prairie plants on both sides of the asparagus. Part of the reason is asparagus is perennial, and we thought these perennial wildflowers could kind of sandwich the perennial strip throughout here. The rest of the beds are annual, so there's peppers and tomatoes and onions and kale and sage and some herbs. Squash down there, that's important because squash is dependent on pollinators. Because this is a long-term site, they finally were able to plant something perennial like the asparagus. A lot of the other garden sites, they don't have that tenure, and so they haven't planted perennial species like fruiting shrubs or fruiting trees or asparagus or any of those perennial things. So this is also a good space to invest in perennial pollinator habitat as well. This is called chokeberry, or sometimes people call aronia berry. This is one of the shrubs that we planted. It has abundant spring flowers. It's in the apple family. There's a lot of different native pollinators that'll come visit that. And then after a lot of blooms in the spring. A lot of blooms, and then after it blooms and the bees come to visit, then it creates fruit that's edible. It looks like a blueberry, but it's more nutritious, but not as tasty right off the plant. Okay. You usually have to process it with a little bit of sugar, but it has more antioxidants. So I wanted to incorporate plants that would be beneficial to insects, but also have kind of cultural value as well that we could eat.
All of these rows here are perennials.
Yes, these are all perennial species. There's grasses that will create nesting habitat for insects. Most of these are tallgrass prairie species or savanna species, things that could tolerate a little shade. This is a woody species, New Jersey tea, that has edible properties as well, but also a beautiful flower that attracts a lot of different insects. There's also a variety of perennial flowers. So we have some mountain mint here. That one brings in all kinds of beneficial wasps and beneficial flies and things. To keep the pollinators here on site, we bring in a variety of other flowers for them to also feed on so that they can kind of maximize pollinator health. Yeah, nobody wants to eat just one type of flower or one type of food. It's healthier for them if there's a variety of different flowers to forage on. There's some echinacea here, there's columbine. I chose certain species that would flower kind of throughout the growing season, some in the spring, some in the summer, and then some in the fall. Species that are known host plants for insects that we want to attract, like monarchs.
Sure.
So there's 2 different species of milkweed here.
Oh, show me the milkweed.
There's a milkweed right here. This is butterfly milkweed. Yeah. And that could bring in monarchs to lay eggs, and then the caterpillars will eat that plant. But then we also planted things that will bloom in the fall so that when monarchs are migrating back to Mexico, they'll have a spot here to come and nectar and refuel for their long journey. So there's a variety of different things here. There's things that attract really specialist bees as well. Some of these prairie clovers are really important for bees that only need a specific kind of flower.
There's, I read this morning, 4,000 types of bees in
North America.
North America.
Yeah, and in Minnesota we have something around 470 and counting.
Wow.
Different species, yeah. Some of them are tiny, some of them are quite big. So they could be nesting in this new perennial habitat as well. Yeah.
Supporting the rest of the garden and the garden.
Exactly. And if we can keep making little pockets of native habitat like this within all of our garden networks, we could be having really thriving communities of people and of all of our native beneficial insects.
This is so multifaceted. Not only did you bring in some native plants and pollinator supporting plants, but you put in some signage. So all the people who come through here can learn about native plants of Minnesota.
Yeah, we want to have the signage, especially this year, because this year these plants, they may look kind of small. They're going to spend all of their energy this season putting down their roots. Some of these roots are 5 to 10 feet deep, can get that deep.
Literally putting down their roots.
Yes, so they're going to not do too much above ground this year. They're mostly going to be rooting down. And next year they're going to just leap up and provide all that floral benefit. The grasses will really bush out. They'll be like kind of shoulder to shoulder, all these plants next year. This year it looks like they've got kind of a lot of space, but next year there's going to be no room for any weeds because they're all going to kind of bush out.
Planting pollinator plants is important in urban settings because so many of our plants rely solely on pollinators to bear fruit. Plants like melons and squash rely only on pollinators, and without the pollinators, we wouldn't get any fruit. The pollinator plants act like a magnet, bring in the pollinators, and then the pollinators can benefit the entire garden the rest of the season.
Pollinators are what we call a keystone species. They visit flowers as adults, and then as adults, they're collecting pollen to feed to their babies. And they're doing the work of moving pollen from plant to plant, which creates fruit set. About 80% of our native species need a pollinator to create fruit and seeds. So without those pollinators in the system, we wouldn't have tomatoes and blueberries and strawberries and peppers, but it also is relevant for natural ecosystems too. The native plant species would decline without pollinators. So they are kind of the linchpin in the ecosystem. I don't think there's an absence of pollinator habitat in urban areas, but I think we could be doing it more thoughtfully. We could be gardening with native species rather than cultivated species. Native species attract insects that have co-evolved with them, and they attract a broader diversity of insects. So that not only helps bring in pollinators, but it also helps bring in native songbirds and other wildlife into urban spaces. So we can be adding quality pollinator habitat right here amidst the vegetable gardens. It will benefit the vegetables, it'll help pollinate squash, it'll attract beneficial insects that'll prey upon the pest species in the garden.
We are putting together the People's Garden. This is the official launch of a one-year project with funding from NRCS, where they're trying to address food insecurity, food access, and equity and inclusion in our communities. This is the Celestial Garden. It actually is something that we've been working on for a couple years, and so this is one model of how we're addressing food insecurity. I always like to say that urban farming, local food production is the latest iteration of the civil rights movement. And so working very diligently to try to bring the whole community together. And that's what we've been doing all summer as we plant our gardens across the 3 garden sites. This is a primarily African-American community, North Minneapolis, and so we certainly have planted greens, and we've planted kale, and we've planted cucumbers. And so we're really just, again, trying to make food available to the residents, to the community members, where they can come and live healthy. We're bringing healthy fare to the village square. So we've been working very hard. One of our big harvests and favorites are tomatoes. So we've planted a lot of tomatoes. Our community really likes green tomatoes and fried green tomatoes. We've planted a lot of peppers of every variety, and we've even planted potatoes.
Today we're just bringing unity to the community. There's a couple of stands over there, people selling stuff. My job here is really everything. I help set up, I help plant, I help landscape, I help weed, pick up trash. We just want to make it look nice and presentable for the community. There are a lot of other young people, and I'm proud to say it, proud to see it. We might be like scattered around different gardens across North Minneapolis, but all together it's about 25 to 30. We plant and pick the vegetables. We could take some home, we give them out to the community. We also bring them back to Oak Park to where they're cooked and served from meals from Dee Dee, the chef, and she helps serve the community through food. I've just been staying connected with the gardens, with the people. Being out here, I've always been connected with the people because this is my community, but the garden is just a different way of doing that. We grow all types of things. We grow squash, tomatoes, peppers. Having a garden is very important because it teaches you the importance about being able to maintain a food source and being able to sustain yourself when all else fails. You know how to grow food, you can provide for your family. We've been doing this. This is nothing new. It's just ever since we've been more modern, we start looking towards grocery stores, and that's fine, but sometimes we just gotta go back to the old ways and rely on our earth. That's why we gotta keep it clean. That's why we gotta plant. That's why we gotta treat the earth right so it can treat us right.
A big part of the People's Garden effort across the country is really not just growing food for humans, but also growing food for the bees. In our partnership with Xerces, we have planted installations of pollinators, gardens as well, all across our garden sites.
I would consider what we're doing here today a tremendous success because we're putting high quality habitat in the ground and because of how many people were involved, because it breeds kind of a culture of agroecology, of conservation in all kinds of farming landscapes, and people are paying attention. People are going to watch this planting over time, see it grow, watch the pollinators come visit the flowers. This is such a community effort, and I'm happy to just be a part of it.
It's something that can really help you heal in the community, especially when there's so much going on. There's so much bloodshed, so much violence in the community. And so anything that we can do to help the youth understand what the importance is of growing life, giving back to the earth, giving back to each other, and growing with each other and working with each other is super, super, super important.
Kids are learning, connections are being made, so I'm happy.
We're growing good in the neighborhood. Good food, good schools, good youth and families.